Hi students, welcome back to video clip 3, week 5, ECO736. I'm just going to go back quickly to the previous slides. We are going to focus on these measures of inequality. I will skip through slides which I expect you to know because it comes from your undergraduate work, and I'll focus on the more advanced applications of these measures. Economists love to express inequality using size distributions. This is where we arrange all individuals by ascending personal income and then divide that total population into distinct groups. Whether it's quintiles, deciles, quartiles, we can split it whichever way. Sometimes you will see something called a Kuznets ratio, but very rarely. This is basically income received by the top 20% divided by income received by the bottom 40% of the population. So if we look at this table here of an example of a developing country with about 20 individuals in it, they are all lined up from the poorest to the richest in terms of their personal income. And if you want to look at quintiles, we can see here in quintile 1, which is the poorest 20% of the population, their share of total income is 5%. Let's compare that to quintile 5, which is the top 20% of the income distribution, and their total share of income is 51%. So clearly you can see the degree of inequality here, and you can analyze it in the same way for deciles. The Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient, you should be very familiar with these measures. You should know how to plot it. You should understand the line of equality, and that ideally we would want our Lorenz curve to be as close to that line of equality as possible. And you can read through this on your own. But what I want to talk to you about is using Lorenz curves to consider the impact or the effect of government intervention in the economy, specifically when it comes to taxation and social spending. So you know from the Bromberger paper that the income that we earn before we are taxed and before we receive any kind of social grant, that's your primary income. And once you factor in social spending by government as well as taxation, you then get your secondary income. So governments often want to know how effective their fiscal processes have been in terms of its potential impact on distribution. So if we look at this graph, for example, of Lorenz curves, the blue one represents your Lorenz curve, the degree of inequality in this society before any kind of government intervention. So this represents your primary income. Okay, and the corresponding Gini coefficient there is 0.69. So this is probably South Africa that we are looking at here. If we then look at how the Lorenz curve changes once government spends on social goods and services, you see that it starts to move closer to the line of equality, meaning that the society has become more equal. And that is also verified if you calculate the Gini coefficient. Income plus the benefits of social spending brings the Gini then to 0.53. So we're moving away from that perfect inequality figure of 1. If we look at the final Lorenz curve, which is this purple line, it's the closest one to the line of equality, and it shows our income is distributed after government has both taxed and spent social spending. Okay, and it has managed to bring about redistribution of income because the rich are now being taxed more and giving over to the poor, and there's social spending that's helping the poor, so that the secondary income looks different. And when we measure the Gini coefficient for the secondary, when the secondary income is considered, it's 0.47. So government intervention of taxation as well as social spending has decreased the Gini from 0.69 to 0.47. Right, so now I'm going to introduce you to another measure called a concentration curve. Now, concentration curve is similar to a Lorenz curve. It is basically where you plot the cumulative benefit or spending on your y-axis versus your cumulative population share on your x-axis. So the only difference here is in the y-axis, where your Lorenz curve plotted your cumulative income, your concentration curve plots your cumulative benefits. Okay? Now, when your concentration curve lies above your Lorenz curve, we can consider that whatever intervention has taken place on public or social spending, it has been redistributive. Okay? So there has been some kind of redistribution from rich to poor. However, it is rather weak. When we consider concentration curves that lie above the diagonal line of equality, we consider that the intervention that led to that was very well targeted at the poor, and we would call that per capita redistributive. Okay, so similar to your Gini coefficient, you can also calculate a concentration coefficient based on your concentration curves. And it is basically the percentage of area between the concentration curve and the diagonal line. Now, bearing in mind that your concentration curve can lie above the diagonal line, the area above the diagonal line is then subtracted from your first calculation, and that means that those concentration curves that lie above the diagonal line, they will have a negative value. And you can just read up a little bit more here about calculating concentration curves, even though you will not be asked to do so. What you do need to understand is the intuition behind this, and you should be able to read graphs and explain what it is actually illustrating. So right here, we have a graph which shows both Lorenz curves as well as concentration curves on the same in the same graph. The x-axis is the same for both cumulative population. Your y-axis represents both your cumulative subsidy or benefit as well as your cumulative income. So if we start off here and we look at our Lorenz curve, this purple line at the bottom, you can see it lies below the line of equality, and this is a fairly unequal society. When government steps in and subsidizes public goods like hospital care or all health care, you can see that it is considered to be what we would refer to as only redistributive. So it's redistributive because it lies above the Lorenz curve, but it is not per capita redistributive because it doesn't lie above the line of equality. If you look at government spending on primary care, you can immediately see that it is very well targeted at the poor. It's what we would consider per capita redistributive because it lies above that line of equality, even though there's room to let it lie even further above that line of equality. So just think about this numerically, right? If you want to look at the first 20% of the population, now remember we rank them from poorest to richest. So these are the poorest 20% of the population. So that cumulative 20% of the population, they are earning about what in income? What percentage? Maybe about okay, the cumulatively like 4% of the total income. But if we look at what they benefit in terms of spending on, say all healthcare, because you can't see the yellow line, the hospital line and the blue turquoise line, they lie on top of each other, you can see that, yeah, they are definitely, that's about, even though they are cumulatively 20% of the population, they are getting about, what's that? Cumulatively 12% of the benefit, right? So it's redistributive. They are getting more than their cumulative share of income, but it's not per capita redistributive, okay? So if we extrapolate this further and we touch this pink primary healthcare line, you can see that 20% of the population, they are getting cumulatively about, say, 22% of the subsidy for primary care. So they are getting more than their cumulative share of the population in subsidy terms for primary care. Okay? So with hospital and all healthcare, yes, it was more than the income they received, but it wasn't more than their share of the population. So it was redistributive, but not per capita redistributive. These lying under the line of equality.